It's the Caleb Show once again. Welcome to Off the Hook Sports with Dave Hooker. Dave is actually on vacation this week, taking a much-needed vacation before we ramp up our July coverage with SEC Media Days and recruiting and preseason just around the corner. With college baseball winding down, this was the time to do it. So for this week, or not the whole time, but at least for today and Friday, and hopefully a couple other segments throughout the week, Caleb Jarreau and I will be doing the show together. I'll also try to have a couple of guests on for you each day. Jarreau, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. The Caleb and Caleb Show is back. How are you?
Pretty good. That's right. The Caleb and Caleb Show is back. I would say that we held it down pretty well last week. Did you enjoy Omaha?
I'm glad I got to come home and sleep a little bit, though.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you did. I guess go home. Were you guys going to stay if Tennessee had won?
No,
the next weekend?
We were not. But luckily, I thought ahead of time that Tennessee would do what they did. I just thought they would. I thought they'd end up losing to Wake Forest and not losing to LSU, but they lost either way. So, kind of worked out.
Yeah, true. You didn't get much of a tan. Hey.
Dude, it was hot though. It was like hot, windy. It's very unpleasant.
Oh, I'm sure. Let's get started. Portions of the program brought to you by Craven Wings. They give you great wings, never frozen, always fresh. Try the fantastic Sauce 87 after our own Jacob Warren. We're going to dive in today now with regular athletic calendar sports over for Tennessee. It's all about recruiting for football. And Tennessee's had a bunch of big recruiting weekends, and they had another huge one this past weekend, a bunch of official visits. It was their final recruiting weekend in June. And it seemed like there was a lot of, excitement from the prospects who did visit over the weekend. Jarreau, you want to go into a few of those? We have a post from Jarreau. We have a few posts from Jarreau, actually, about Peyton Lewis visiting. Also a bunch of other, Peyton Lewis reaffirming his commitment, and then a bunch of other commitments over the weekend who really stood out and really made their presence felt on social media. Jarreau, let's dive in on that. What do you have for us?
Yeah, this weekend was a pretty big weekend in terms of just like peer recruiting. So obviously up on offthehooksports.com right now is an article with Peyton Lewis talking about how he was trying to peer recruit another running back, Braylon Russell, who was visiting this weekend as well. And he said Coach Mack called him and Russell Thunder and Lightning, and he wants both of them kind of in the backfield together next season. So that was big for Lewis. And this weekend was also big for a lot of other guys. I mean, you had Boo Carter on campus who was peer recruiting as well. You had a couple other commitments on campus that were peer recruiting. And then the biggest thing from my point of view, and we've talked about this before, is getting those big four-star offensive linemen. So you've got, Bennett Warren was on campus this weekend, and that was his first time seeing Tennessee, and he really enjoyed it. So getting him on campus, finally getting him to look at campus, a Texas lineman, he's, 6'7", over 300 pounds, getting him to look at campus and see it for the first time kind of opens up a door for Tennessee to get in there and recruit him. Right now, it seems like he's probably leaning towards an A&M, but he's also taking his final schools also included Oklahoma and Michigan. So for him, getting on campus for the first time, I'd say it's probably one of the biggest visits this weekend.
Before we had you on the last time, Tennessee hadn't picked up Max Sanderson yet. They hadn't picked up Jordan Burns. They did pick up Boo Carter because they picked him up over the weekend. But obviously kind of a big recruiting weekend for that. With this past weekend of visits, it really seems like recruiting is starting to – would you say summer recruiting is starting to heat up for Tennessee? And it's something you called. You said it may not be as quickly as what Florida's doing, but you did rightly predict it would eventually pick up. Would you say that's what's happening right now?
I would say so, yeah. And another thing with Tennessee is their official visit, their big weekend was the last weekend of the month. So the recruiting dead period started today, and Tennessee had their big official visit weekend this past weekend. So it's kind of – I guess if you want to talk about recency bias, they're the last campus all of these prospects saw before going into July and, making their decision. So like a Bennett Warren is probably going to decide sometime in July. You've also got Ronan O'Connell, another in-state offensive lineman that Tennessee is really big on. He's probably the top offensive lineman on their board right now. He's expecting to decide in July, and it's going to come down to between Clemson and Tennessee. So really not seeing guys jump and commit early in June, Tennessee targets was better for the Vols because they hosted this big official visit weekend, the last weekend of the month. So I'd expect a lot of decisions, whether they're Tennessee's way or not, to come down in July. And then obviously there's a couple battles that'll probably run into August, and a lot of kids like to decide right before their senior season so they can get that off their chest and just go play football. So I'm sure we'll see a couple August decisions as well.
So let's talk about a couple of guys that kind of had something to say on social media. One of them being Elijah Rushing. I believe he's visiting actually. Did he visit this past weekend or is he visiting this weekend at 5-star edge rusher?
He visited this past weekend. So this was their last official visit weekend of June.
Okay. So you write that he has visits or he's visited Oregon or has visits with Oregon, Notre Dame, Arizona, and UCLA. I mean, edge rusher, the guy comes from Arizona. Edge rusher is a position where Tennessee has loaded up on talent, but it seems like one where they're able to, even though they have defensive woes, they seem to be a pretty good appealing school for edge rushers because you can rack up stats in Tim Dink's system. What are your thoughts on Elijah Rushing?
Yeah, he seemed to really enjoy the weekend. And like you said, Tennessee is a very friendly offense to edge rushers, especially if you don't have your hand in the ground. They also often have like a sort of outside linebacker-esque position that Rushing is interested to play in Tennessee as well. 6'6", 235 pounds from Arizona, like you said. He's one that Tennessee's really the only SEC school on his board, and they'll have to go and get him from the West Coast, away from the Pac-12 schools like Oregon. And I guess if you want to call UCLA, it's basically a Pac-12 school, even though it's not in the Pac-12 anymore. It's got that same culture vibe sort of deal going on there. But he's a guy that had a really good visit, loved it on social media. He's spoken highly of Tennessee before, and he's the number 3 edge in the class. So Tennessee's in there battling for him. It's just a matter of if he wants to leave the West Coast and come to Tennessee for him.
My experience with these things is it always stands out a little bit if a school if there's one school that's not connected to the other schools in the running. That typically means there's something they uniquely like about that school. There's a vibe they get with that school alone, which is a really good sign for Tennessee if he's willing to leave.
Yeah, I agree, especially since Tennessee's the only SEC school. I mean, I would say Tennessee's facilities can battle with, Arizona, UCLA, and Oregon. Now, if he just wants to go to LA, Tennessee really can't argue with that. But if he wants to compare, indoor facility to indoor facility, I'd say Tennessee is right there up with the schools he's considering.
Let's talk a little bit about Braylon Russell, the other open commitment from this past weekend. You talked about Peyton Lewis recruiting other running backs. Russell, you write that he is set to commit July 14th. The race has come down to Tennessee and Arkansas. It's funny because Arkansas is his hometown school, but is it a red flag to you that it's down to Tennessee and Arkansas and not like Tennessee and Alabama or Tennessee and Georgia or something like that?
I think just because it is his in-state school, and for him growing up, I'm sure he was watching Arkansas a lot more than he was watching Tennessee as well. Arkansas also gives him the chance to play a lot earlier than Tennessee, just for the sake of that's Arkansas. It's not as deep of a roster right now. But for him, like I said, Peyton Lewis was really trying to get him to come. I mean, Jerry Mack was calling Russell and Peyton Lewis. He was calling them thunder and lightning in the backfield. Thought they'd be a very dynamic duo, and really they see Russell as the last running back in their class to kind of round out their 24 group. So he's going to commit on July 14th. I'm sure we'll hear a lot of things between now and July 14th, but it does look like it's coming down to Tennessee and Arkansas. He also officially visited South Carolina as well, but I don't see them being a major player in the end of his recruitment.
And lastly, this was an unofficial visit, but 2025 athlete Daryl Johnson. One of the big things that we've noticed with Tennessee is they're really getting out ahead with some of these commitments. Max Anderson, that was the biggest reason they got his commitment, was they offered him before anybody else. They scouted him and they noticed him. Is Daryl Johnson one of those guys too? Would you say that they're really getting out ahead of the curve and that should help them long term? And talk a little bit about him coming out of Georgia.
Yeah, so he has a couple other schools that he holds offers from, like Alabama, Georgia. But talking to him, he did say that right now, just how hectic his visits and schedules and camps are, that he hasn't had a chance to sit down and really think about what schools are at the top of his list right now, but he plans to do that very soon. And for Tennessee, obviously they had seen him before. It wasn't the first time. Like, he didn't come to the camp on Sunday and get offered. Johnson said he came and he didn't even participate in the camp on Sunday. He just took a tour, took a visit, and he sat down with Brian Jean-Marie and he said they talked for about 10, 15 minutes, and he was like, I really like your personality, and you seem like a good kid, and that's how he ended up with offer from Tennessee. So he's, like you said, he's a guy that in the long run is somebody that should probably land. 4-star prospect. They're getting in with him early from the state of Georgia. So it's a battle where they have to go into Georgia and kind of get him out of that state. But like I said, he's still early on, hasn't evaluated his top schools, but I'd say he was impressed with Tennessee's facilities and obviously liked them enough to come take a visit, use his last weekend of the dead period to visit Tennessee. So I'd say, like you said, getting in with the 25 athletes early, there's a couple others that were on campus this weekend as well that they're trying to build relationships with is pretty big still in Tennessee's recruiting.
So to the message boards real quick. Good morning, Rocky Top Tom, first commenter. For those of you asking, no, Dave is not on the saucer hungover. He's on a family vacation. Okay. His son is going to college this year. He wanted a family summer vacation, a much-deserved summer vacation. It's the end of June. He's allowed to do that. Mr. Jones says and Smoky Mountain Red both talking about the possibility of Tennessee having a top 5 class. I think it's possible. I still predict like a 5 to 7, 8 range, Jarreau, but I think a 5 to 8 range is fine for Tennessee with Heupel scheming to go with that. They just can't be below that.
Yeah, and I think when you combine transfer portal pickups as well, which I'm sure Heupel will have some more before the 24 class even gets to campus, then it'll work out all right. I would say 5 is probably a little high. Even I'd say 6 to 8 right now, just because of some of the momentum some other schools had. But the class is still a long way from done, so we could see them jump into top 5 for sure. Just depends on if they can win a couple of these big name battles.
Exactly. And Travis asked who would choose Arkansas over Tennessee. It's not 1955. Well, Travis, this kid's from Arkansas that we're talking about. And honestly, before last year, Arkansas was actually a more high-profile program than Tennessee. People had more faith in them under Sam Pittman. So that wasn't that long ago. And if KJ Jefferson has a rebound year, watch out. I mean, look, if a certain Arkansas head coach didn't get in a motorcycle accident, we might be talking about them as still a top 10 program. And Mr. Jones has a Nico question. We got a Nico post up from last week about expectations. I think he would be ready, but it's Joe Milton's job. We're going to get to Joe Milton soon, actually, funny enough. But Smoky Mountain Red is asking you a question, Jarreau. Do you have a Star Wars Stormtrooper Funko Pop behind you?
I do. I have several, but there's one in screen right there, I guess. Captain Phasma, but there's a lot of Star Wars Funko Pops up there.
Look at you killing it. I'm a Star Wars fan too. So, all right. I'm not going to engage anybody that engages in conspiracy theories about Dave being off this week. Just so you know, we're going to show him the proper respect. Great history point, Elias. 1955 was the year Bowden Wyatt went from Arkansas to Tennessee. Funny year to randomly pick. That's a very, very good point. Okay, so before we move on from this, Joe, I wanted to talk about just national recruiting rankings in general. Tennessee still, I would say, fringe top 10. One of the interesting things, though, to me is something you said seems to already be happening. Florida seems to have peaked, and they're going to slowly slide. They're already down to number 4 after being number 2 last week. Ohio State and Michigan are right there at number 2 and number 3. Michigan has always been on the fringe top 10, top 15 range with Harbaugh. They're now top 5. Do you see this as a permanent fixture with them under Harbaugh? What changed, would you say, with the program?
Well, there's been some talk about – so Michigan's never been able to go into Ohio and get a kid they wanted, but Ohio State could always go into Michigan and get a kid they wanted. And you're kind of seeing that change a little bit. I think the Urban Meyer-esque team and recruiting is sort of done. So I worry that – I guess don't worry, but for Ohio State's sake, I think they might be losing their grasp a little bit on their kids. Because, I mean, you probably have a better thought on this than me, Calhoun, but it seems like in the past, like I said, Michigan could keep their kids in Michigan, but if Ohio State wanted a kid from Michigan, they got them. There really wasn't any question about it for the most part. And then with Florida, like you said, I really do think they peaked just because all of their commitments were Florida leans. So it's just kind of they got all of their guys to commit in the same weekend. It wasn't anybody groundbreaking that they really won a big battle over.
Yeah, and Dave and I talked. We both have a bit of a conspiracy theory that there were probably guys that were going to commit later. And after the 2 decommitments, Billy Napier didn't want the narrative out there that he was losing control over the program. So he probably asked him, hey, guys, can you go ahead and commit now so we can get a little bit momentum reversed? As for
yeah,
Michigan,
but now you run into Oh, I was going to say, now you run into the problem of you don't have your commitment stretched out. So they might not have another commitment for a couple months.
Yeah, exactly. As for Michigan, Ohio State, I look at it the reverse. I'm not so sure Ohio State goes into Michigan and gets Michigan kids easily. I just think Ohio is a better recruiting state than Michigan in general. So Michigan can't win a championship by just closing its borders and staying in state. Ohio State can. Ohio State, Georgia, and LSU are the three schools that can do that because they have no competition in them. The goal for Michigan was always to be able to go into high, but you're right. They had trouble going into Ohio and getting a few kids. And I think, the questions are starting to come up about Ryan Day and what he can do. He's lost to Michigan 2 years in a row. And and that could be an issue long term. Another thing we're seeing is Penn State is really closing off Pennsylvania more than they have in the past this year. And that's keeping them in the top 6. Look, I know divisions are dying, guys, but at least, before divisions were to die, if they weren't in 2024, there's a really good argument that the Big Ten East would be the toughest division in college football, not the SEC West, given what's going on in the Big Ten East with recruiting right now. And Notre Dame's number 5, but honestly, I think that's a volume class. Dave and I talked about this last week. That's more of a volume class than it is actual real talent, we would argue. And that definitely holds true for Stanford, who's somehow in the top 10. But
yeah, and whenever you talk to like Ohio State people about if they're starting to like lose recruiting battles to Michigan, Ohio State people say, Ohio State didn't want that kid. He wasn't high on their board. But you look at some of these guys, I just put up Michigan's class, like Ted Hammond, a 4-star defensive lineman from Cincinnati. Luke Hamilton, a 4-star interior offensive lineman from Avon, Ohio. A 3-star offensive tackle from Lakewood, Ohio. Like, these are kids that used to be just locks for Ohio State, like you said. And now, all of a sudden, they're starting to go to Michigan, and Michigan can start strengthening their – because they're, like you said, they're always fringe top 10. We're not saying Michigan recruited poorly. But now they can start taking that fringe top 10 class and adding some big guys from Ohio State – or big guys from Ohio, some 4-stars, some highly ranked 3-stars. And now, all of a sudden, you have 23 commitments and your class is third ranked on 247 Sports. So they really are making that jump from, I would say, like you said, fringe top 10. I mean, they have a 4-star Jordan Marshall from Cincinnati, Ohio, a running back, like top 100 player in the class. So they're making a jump from fringe top 10 to top 5 with Ohio kids.
Yep, exactly. Portions of the program brought to you by City Heat and Air Conditioning. City Heat and Air integrity matters. City Heating and Air Conditioning. It's phenomenal. Might need some love on your HVAC unit with the weather really, really hot right now. Some people will tell you to replace it, but you may not need to. Go to cityheatandair.com to find out. City Heating and Air Conditioning. Moving on, a certain Tennessee quarterback kind of made a bit of a name for himself at the Manning Passing Academy this past week, to no surprise of anybody. It's everything we expected. Joe Milton consistently showed off his big arm, and he wowed Peyton Manning. And according to Milton, they have a pretty good connection, he and Manning. Jarreau, what do you make of this? Do you think this is anything to read into, or is this just everything we knew was true about Joe Milton, that he just wows everybody with his big arm and what he can do?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me was that he has like a sort of mentor-esque relationship, kind of, it seemed, with Peyton Manning, which Peyton Manning is probably the best quarterback to come through Tennessee, should have been a Heisman winner, and now he can coach up Joe Milton. He was in the NFL forever as well, so even if it's not necessarily on the field stuff, he can help Joe Milton with some of the off the field stuff that comes with being a quarterback, like studying plays, stuff like that, being the big guy at Tennessee. So what stood out to me most was not that, he threw the ball 70 yards, because that's just expected at this point with Joe Milton. The thing that stood out to me most was how Manning talked about how he talks to Joe often and really likes Joe. So, I mean, you basically have a very good quarterback saying, yes, Joe will be successful.
Yes, and I want everybody to take this with a grain of salt. Peyton Manning is the ultimate diplomat. When Peyton Manning speaks positively of something, it means absolutely nothing. Okay, Peyton Manning's not going to sit there And when everybody's thinking that Joe Milton's a good quarterback, he's not going to sit up there and say Joe Milton's horrible. He's never going to criticize people. He's never going to criticize a program. That's not what Peyton Manning's going to do. I guarantee you, you do an interview with Peyton Manning, ask him about every member of that camp. Every single quarterback at that camp was great because that's how Peyton Manning operates. So I'm with Jarreau. I think it's more just having the connection with Peyton should help. And there's some certain things he can learn. But again, you have to take this with a grain of salt too, because Peyton Manning, his way of coaching at the Manning camp and the Manning Passing Academy and the way he learned was in a pro-style offense, the whole pocket presence, the 3-step, 5-step drop. For him, for lack of mobility, jabbing your feet. Heupel doesn't want the big drop back with Joe Milton. Heupel, or any quarterback for that matter, his system is quick, 2-step drop, quick read, make the throw. And that's not really conducive for developing you for the NFL. Now, that's not a problem because NFL coaches can develop you on their own. That's not that hard to develop into. But it's not going to help you much when you're trying to learn, quite honestly, from Peyton Manning because he is more the pure pro-style drop-back quarterback who, again, learned mobility and pocket awareness. I think the biggest thing Joe could learn from Peyton Jarreau is pocket awareness. Would you say that's probably the most important thing?
I would say so, and I think that kind of comes into the mental part, like I mentioned, because obviously I don't see Joe Milton and Peyton Manning teaching each other, or I don't see Peyton Manning teaching Joe Milton, like throwing mechanics or, like you said, the 3-step drop, because it was just a different game that Peyton Manning played in college. So I really think, like you said, pocket awareness and some of the other mental stuff, like maybe just locker room stuff, like how to be a leader the right way now that Joe Milton is the starting quarterback in the locker room. Stuff like that where you can just ask Peyton Manning for advice because Peyton's been through that. So pocket awareness, I would say, is a big thing because oftentimes you don't notice a quarterback has good pocket awareness until they don't. And then it usually shows up with like a strip sack or, getting blindsided and the defensive lineman takes it back for a touchdown.
Yes, I'm sure you remember that was Hendon Hooker's biggest weakness in 2021 and probably the biggest improvement he made from 2021 to 2022 was his pocket awareness because I did not see him as an NFL quarterback in 2021 specifically because of that. And then overnight, I mean, how many times did he get sacked last year? Like 5? Was it even that many?
Yeah, and the only blindside sack I remember was against LSU when I can't remember who was in, which running back, but they missed the assignment. And so there was just a free rusher. Yeah, and I mean, obviously Jalen Wright is not the running back who does that often, so it was kind of like chalk it up as, oh, well. But that's the only time I can remember Hendon Hooker ever really getting blindsided, and it looked like he didn't know what was happening in the pocket. Besides that, like you said, he'd step up, make throws, step back, make throws. He could roll out. Like, that's just stuff that you don't really think about, but it's probably arguably the most important thing for a quarterback, especially in this offense.
Yeah. I mean, he's not going to have to learn the whole methodical picking a defense apart the way Peyton Manning did because of the way this offense goes. But he is going to have to learn the pocket presence, particularly with the way the receivers run there. They need time to get down the field. Sorry, I said I wasn't going to engage, but this comment from Travis. Travis, come on. Dave's not in rehab. He probably is hating on Joe Milton secretly to himself right now, but he's not in rehab. You guys are just absolutely ridiculous right now. I didn't want to engage, but so I'm sorry. I'm going down these message boards, and I'm just dying right now. We try to limit when we go down the whole rabbit hole of the message boards, but some of y'all are just too funny, and it's hard for me to just ignore what some of y'all say. Now, Gene Dasher has a great point that Peyton was a really good resource for Hendon Hooker. Gene, that is true. Largely, though, it was about Hooker's pocket presence. Hooker mostly, now David and I disagree on this a lot. Jarreau, I want to know what you think. I think Hooker's deep ball accuracy was always there. I didn't see much improvement. Not because I thought he was already elite as a deep ball thrower in 2021. I just thought it was his pocket presence that kind of held him back. Did you notice much of a change in his actual deep ball accuracy at all from 2021 to 2022?
No, his deep ball actually, I think, was always there. I think a lot of it was sort of – I do think in 2022 we got to see more deep balls because of pocket presence, like you say. And I also think a little improvement may have come from just his offensive line improving as well. I mean, you had Darnell Wright really come into his own in 2022. You had a solidified Javonte Spraggins on the other side helping Hendon Hooker get the ball down the field as well. So I think that played a role into it a little bit. But like I don't think the accuracy was always a problem, but getting the balls off was not as big of a thing in 21 as 22.
Yeah, I agree. And you're right. The improvement on the line was a big thing. And that's going to be a big question this year with Jerome Carvin gone, Darnell Wright gone, Joe Mincy moving over to right tackle. By that token, you have 3 new positions next year that are going to be played on the offensive line, which is going to be a big question. I would say that one of the things that's intriguing about Heupel's offense is everybody thinks that, you want the conditioned offensive lineman that can get down the field, but Javonte Spraggins is proving, man, at guard, that 325, 330-pound blocker is still valuable at guard in Josh Heupel's offense.
Yeah, and you look at a guy like Spraggins, and he can still get up and down the field, I'd say, pretty well. So I think you are seeing that you can be, I guess more so in this system, you can be conditioned at 325, 330 to get up and down the field and still be very effective on the line compared to more of like our guy like a Cooper Mays build where you're a smaller guy that's more of a speed blocker. And you can make the argument as well that you don't have to hold your blocks as long in this offense either. So that could save some energy and help you have smaller linemen on the line as well, because the ball's off in a lot shorter time than you think about a 3-step drop offense.
Right. I think it is crucial for the guards to a certain degree because they're still Heupel's offense more than others depends heavily on the run and on the north side, on the vertical rushing attack, not your misdirection counter plays. I mean, we're talking like straight up and down, north and south. But you are right. A lot of it, there are a lot more. It's a lot more about leverage than winning man-on-man matchups, I feel like, a lot of times. Cooper Mays showed that. Oh, my mind drew a blank. Who was the massive Florida defensive lineman last year that Cooper Mays won battles with consistently?
Oh, I know who you're talking about. The one there, if you look at his picture right now, it's him running the ball and stiff-arming Spencer Rattler.
Oh. Yes. It's – I got to look this up real quick. But, yeah, it was basically Cooper won – Was it Des Watson? Was that his name? But
yeah, it's Des Watson. That's him.
Okay.
That picture where he's putting Spencer Rattler into the ground is like the best football picture ever. Just because you have a 400-pound lineman running the ball and stiff-arming Spencer Rattler.
Yeah, that's true. I think that was the week before Tennessee played Spencer Rattler and got torched by him, funny enough. But, yeah, Cooper Mays won those battles with him, which was crazy to think about. So, yeah, that was pretty crazy. Coming up, is Tennessee going to make the 12-team college football playoff in 2024? And are we entering a moneyball era of college football, as one fellow college football TV show host seems to think? We're going to touch on both of those things. Stay with us. 2 minutes. We'll be right back.
Estamos en Craving Wings South North Shore location, where we've heard people say that you can get the best wings in East Tennessee. Pero ¿quién es este? El número 87, Jacob Warren.
I'll just do 6 of my sauce 87, please.
Imposible, señorita. Dale 6 más. Look at these wings. Perfectas, deliciosas, fantásticas.
Man, I don't know what you're saying, but it sounds awesome. How do you say fresh, never frozen in Spanish?
Frescas, nunca congeladas. Make your way to Craving Wings and get you 6 más.
What was funny about Kate is we were a full continuum of care at that time. We had detox, we had inpatient, we had outpatient. So we were doing a lot of the things that we do now. But now we just do them so much better. It's really a simple program, but we're complicated people. I am what I am, and now I got to do something about it.
You can take your life back. Call Cadis today.
Got cataracts? We can fix that. Never miss another moment. With a little help from Doctors Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Hahn at cctis.com.
Do you want to own the more that owns every job? Then get to Vassey Lawn and Garden in Cleveland and get you a Toro. I'm David Vassey, here to talk to you about Toro. With a Toro Zero Turn, you'll get more out of every minute and you'll reach the finish line faster. At Vassey's, we like to say, no matter if you're mowing 3 acres a week or 11 lawns a day, homeowners and business owners alike find confidence in equipment they can trust from top to bottom.
Vassey Lawn and Garden, Highway 60 North in Cleveland.
Man alive, it's worth the drive.
Our family has been creating jewelry since 1986. each piece unique with a story all its own. I'm Rick Terry with Rick Terry Jewelry Designs. I'm a jeweler, and I want to be your jeweler. We're grateful that you chose us to be Knoxville's best jeweler. My family and staff look forward to serving you. So please come see us. Kingston Pike and Campbell Station Road in the heart of Farragut, and downtown on Gay Street, right next to the Tennessee Theater.
Welcome back. We got a few interesting comments. Let's see what we're going here. Mr. Jones, a shot at Nick Saban losing his mind after the muff punt was a pretty awesome snapshot. Yes, it was. That's going to be one of the most legendary moments in Tennessee history. Travis has a great point. ESPN showed the Orange Bowl this past weekend. The game was a lot closer than the score indicated. Clemson played hard, but defense really shut him down. Cade, Klubnik's parents were indeed in attendance, by the way. Yeah, Jarreau, it's funny. I kind of think Milton's performance in the Orange Bowl was a bit overrated, honestly. I think Clemson was playing a bare defense most of the time, and were testing him with the middle of the field and left it open. And there were a lot of drives he didn't finish on, for being honest.
I think you can make an argument either way. I just like, at this point with bowl games that aren't the playoff, I don't think we can take much from them at all.
Yep. Totally.
I mean,
sorry.
Because, I mean, no, I was just going to say, like, Joe didn't have his best weapons either, realistically.
No, that's a fair point.
It's just the way, I mean, sitting out bowl games now, I just think you really can't take anything from it. It's basically a glorified spring practice at that point.
Yeah, they're basically exhibitions, which you were a little young during this, but I'm sure you know it being a Louisiana guy, but Jamarcus Russell became a number 1 draft pick because of what he did in Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl all those years ago. But I was like, then, you know, after a month off, you can never judge you should never draft a quarterback because they have what they do in one bowl game that has no championship implications after a month off. That's just not the best way to do that.
Or even worse, Zach Wilson's pro day. Remember the whole throwing off one foot?
Oh, yeah.
And then he got drafted by the Jets, and now look at how that turned out. So, and it's funny you bring up Jamarcus Russell because that was the first tweet I saw with the video of Joe Milton throwing the ball, was everybody asking if he had the strongest arm since Jamarcus Russell.
Oh, gosh. Yes, definitely not a guy you want to be compared to. I think Joe Milton has much better intangibles than Jamarcus Russell, and maybe a much better set of leaders around him in terms of coaching. Jamarcus Russell had the ultimate enablers in Les Miles and Jimbo Fisher. So, well, it's a little bit, we got to be a little bit fair on that. All right, moving on.
Yes.
We don't think that Tennessee football is going to make the college football playoff this year. It would be, if they did, that's great for the program. If they don't, I think most of us think that's fine. It's still a 14 playoff. But in 2024, when Nico Iamaleava starts, I don't have the sound effects, forgive me. And when the playoff expands to 12 teams, I think Tennessee should expect to make the playoff that year. But our boy Brad Crawford over at 247 Sports disagrees. He did a early projection of next year's college football playoff. And the first round was Boise State at Alabama, Florida State at Michigan, Kansas State at LSU, Oregon at USC. Quarterfinals were the teams that would get the first round byes are Georgia, Ohio State, Clemson, and Oklahoma, which is crazy because that means he's giving 2 SEC teams first round byes. But SEC teams he's putting in are Oklahoma, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, and somehow no Tennessee. Jarreau, I think it's crazy that he's putting Oklahoma in as a top 4 team with a bye and Tennessee not getting in.
When you first sent me that, I was wondering if there was a limit to conference teams that I didn't know about. Because I find it hard to believe Tennessee wouldn't be a top 12 team. Just even if you were playing quarterback, Calhoun, I think they could swing a top 12 team with the offense. Nonetheless, like you have a 5-star quarterback tailor-made for the system, and you're saying that Tennessee's not going to be in the playoff, I do think it's crazy as well.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. And you're right. It's technically there's a limit. The limit is 7 conference teams because, you know, you got the top six conference champions and then the top 6 wild cards. So technically you can't have more than 7 teams in your conference. But yeah, I think the thing that drives me crazy is I'm wondering where he's getting this Oklahoma pick from. One, we've seen Oklahoma's schedule in 2024. They get the most brutal draw possible. And on top of that, I'm not much of a believer in Brent Venables, quite honestly. There's a long history of having of red flags being raised when defensive coordinators wait forever to get head coaching jobs. Now, yes, you could say that was the case with Kirby Smart, but as everybody knows, Kirby Smart, he was waiting for the right job. He had other offers. He just didn't want to take those offers because why take those offers when you can wait for the right job to open? Brent Venables had trouble finding a job for a long time. That's a red flag. And then Oklahoma's got a brutal draw, and he goes from that to saying that Oklahoma's going to be a top 4 seed in next year's playoff. I'm sorry, that just makes no sense to me. And I mean, I think, gun to your head right now, Jarreau, Tennessee or Oklahoma, who would you say would get a playoff bid?
I would say Tennessee. I mean, I don't think you talk about Venables. I think Venables is a great defensive coordinator, which is fine. But I don't like the idea in 2023 of hiring defensive-minded coaches because the game is going away from, they say defense wins ball games, but it's not very often that we still have, I think back to just LSU, Alabama in 2011 where it was like 9-6 because both defenses were just absolutely dominant that game. Like, I don't think we have that anymore. I think that part of the game is gone. I think you have to have an offensive-minded head coach really at this point. Yes, Kirby Smart's an exception, but he's also not – he doesn't turn away from the offense completely like I feel like Venables has at Oklahoma. Like, I feel like Kirby Smart still influences his offense to some extent.
Here's the rule with defensive versus offensive coaches. If you're going to have a defensive coach – then you can only win with Jimmys and Joes, not X's and O's. Like, you have to have better Jimmys and Joes than everybody else because defense is run by talent. I mean, last year, Tennessee, Georgia. Tennessee had the schematic advantage, but Georgia had the Jimmys and Joes on defense, and there was just nothing Tennessee could do no matter how much Josh Heupel schemed with his offense. You're not going to get Jimmys and Joes on that level at Oklahoma. You're just not. I mean, it's a good job. You can't get what Georgia or LSU or Ohio State can get. So, yeah, you need more of an offensive mind at that point. And, yeah, I just think it was ridiculous that they had this idea of Oklahoma getting in there. I understand Boise State because you got one group of 5 teams going to be getting in during this new system. I will say Florida State and Clemson both getting in. Sorry, don't buy it. I don't think the ACC is ever going to have more than one team get in. And honestly, with the SEC and Big Ten getting as loaded as they are, I think you're really cheapening the integrity of the college football playoff if you put multiple teams from other conferences in. Honestly, I think, Joe, between me and you, I don't know how you feel, but I think the SEC and the Big Ten should be the only conferences that should be allowed to have multiple teams in 2024 because it's just going to be so loaded.
I think the ACC could swing a second team. I just don't see it being Florida State. That one's kind of strange. Because am I missing something? Does Florida State have a lot of momentum right now that I just haven't? Do I live under a rock?
Sorry, what were you going to say?
Because if you told me to pick a second ACC school right now that might have a chance, I would say if Miami rebuilds their roster, they might have a chance in 24. I don't see Florida State going from where they are right now to a 12-team playoff.
It is hilarious you say that because I've been ranting about that. Dave will tell you for 2 months now. I've been on the soapbox that Florida State's the most overrated team in all of football. They went 10-3 last year. And remember, Mike Norvell was borderline on the hot seat. Remember, went 5-7 in 2021, and he was on the hot seat, and they went 10-3, and there's this idea that he turned it around. But just in case you're interested, Jarreau, yes, they beat LSU, which was LSU's first game under Brian Kelly, and that was the flukiest game of all time. LSU should have won that game. If they play LSU at the end of the season.
Yeah, LSU's kicker forgot to do his one job.
Yes.
Kick.
Exactly. If they play at the end of the season, that's a blowout in LSU's favor. And LSU wasn't ranked. So Florida State played 3 teams that were ranked at the time. Wake Forest, NC State, and Clemson. Guess what? They lost all 3 of them. And they went 10-3.
It's not a good group.
No, not a good group at all. Their best win was the only team they beat that was ever ranked all year was LSU. And again, that was at the beginning of the season when LSU was unranked, and that wasn't the same LSU team that beat Alabama weeks later. So it's laughable to me that people are this high on Florida State. I think it's because they did very well in the transfer portal this offseason, but Jarreau, we're going to start seeing this get exposed this year. People are really hyping the transfer portal in terms of building up talent. It doesn't work the same as in recruiting. There is still a chemistry factor that you can't just throw a hodgepodge of talent together and immediately maintain what you're doing.
That's why I think what Josh Heupel does with the transfer portal is so good. Because you think of like a Dante Thornton. Tennessee has recruits that can play wide receiver, but they were missing that third, fourth guy who they need to be able to play right now. You go pick up Dante Thornton. He's capable. You throw him on the field. He can go. You think of a John Campbell. Tennessee needs offensive line help this season. So they go out and get an offensive lineman who they can put on the field right now. Same thing with Andrej Carrick. You don't see Josh Heupel building his program with the transfer portal. You only see him filling needs with it. Because let's say even if Tennessee missed out on every wide receiver in the transfer portal this cycle for some reason, you still had a couple guys on the roster you could probably put in that position and still be successful. I don't think – I'm with you, especially in sports like football or basketball where chemistry – basketball especially you saw with chemistry where it's like the utmost importance. You can't build a program with the transfer portal. I just don't think it works.
Yeah, you can't. You have to get – you can get a couple of weapons in where you need it and maybe even a quarterback, and then that's where your advantage. I mean, let's talk about last year. Everybody underrates the reason Tennessee was so successful last year is they returned so many starters from the year before. They had such a level of familiarity playing with each other, honestly. And that outweighed whatever they got in the transfer portal, which they got some help. And you're right, they got help this year. But, yeah, I agree. Heupel's done a much better job going about it. I'm looking at these teams that they're saying are going to get ahead of them, and I'm with you. Florida State is probably – I don't know which one annoys me more between Florida State and Oklahoma because, quite honestly, neither of those Oklahoma I don't get, and Florida State to me is the most overrated program. I think Mike Norvell is going to – the bottom's going to fall back out of this year. He had one flash in the pan going 10-3 with a very, very easy schedule and a very, very bad ACC this past year. A couple other people he has. Kansas State is a projected team, but again – you got to have a Big 12 champion in there because of the whole 6 conference champions in this 12-team playoff. So Kansas State's in there. LSU, I understand. Oregon and USC. Oregon because you got to have a Pac-12 champion, and it can't be USC because they're going to be in the Big 10 at this point. And then, yeah, Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan. I get all those. Clemson, fine. But
I think that's probably the only way you consistently see 2 ACC teams is if Clemson gets upset in the championship.
Yes, exactly.
Because then you have to put 2 in. Because you assume that Clemson will stay Clemson and still be, top 10-ish, 8-ish every season, whether they win a championship or not. And if they go in the ACC championship and just get upset or, like y'all talked about before, maybe they decide to rest their starting quarterback for the ACC championship. Because why would you want to risk an injury a week or 2 before the playoff and then they get upset? I bet that's an easy way you can see 2 ACC teams every season.
But what if,
or most seasons.
Okay, so but let's think about this for a minute, though. And this is something that we kind of we can't really ignore. Clemson's undefeated going to the ACC championship game. And Alabama has 3 losses. And I don't know if I'm sure you've seen it, right? Their schedule next year is brutal with who they play. I mean, they got all the rough draws. Didn't they? I think they got Georgia. Did they get Georgia? I'm trying to remember if they got Georgia or not. But
I want to say they did because they tried to, their strength of schedule argument.
Right. Sorry, I'm pulling up their strength of schedule now just to see. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so Alabama's playing Georgia, at Tennessee, at LSU, Auburn, which will be better next year. And honestly, even non-conference, they're playing at Wisconsin, which don't sleep on them with Luke Fickell there. With that schedule, Alabama loses 3 games. Clemson's undefeated, loses the ACC title game. Jarreau, I don't think any serious person would put Clemson in over Alabama at that point. And people would say that's Alabama bias or Nick Saban bias, but look at their schedule versus Clemson's schedule.
I guess it would depend on where the losses come and how bad. Because that's one of the things where we saw it a little bit this past year where with TCU, like at some point, I guess you have to factor in the eye test. Like, does Alabama go to Neyland Stadium and lose by 40, or do they lose by a field goal? Do they go to Wisconsin and lose by 40, or do they win by a touchdown? You know, stuff like that where 3 losses by field goals is a lot different than 3 losses by, you know, multiple touchdowns.
Yes, that's true. But and so you're right. They do have to actually make them games, which I think we all think they will. But I think Wisconsin, Georgia, Tennessee, and LSU are all better than every single team Clemson's going to play in 2024. And so that's really the big problem for me is that this is where I'm kind of at, like, with the ACC and these other ones, you should have to win your conference at this point if we're going to do these top 6 conference champions, because these wild card teams, I mean, again, I'm sorry, Clemson, you lose the ACC title game, you're out. This is, given what the SEC and the Big Ten too, to their credit, the Big Ten's going to have to deal with this too. I mean, if you're playing Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State in a year and you have 3 losses, that's the same. Those are all 3 tougher teams than anybody else. So this is my thing with the playoff. I don't see how you could make the case for a second ACC team and also for Oklahoma getting a top 4 seed. That just ain't happening. By the way, Alabama visits Oklahoma next year too. So Brad Crawford thinks that's going to be a really brutal game for them.
The 12-team playoff will probably end up causing more arguments than the 4-team playoff does, just over the fact that you'll have, like you said, like if Clemson goes undefeated in the ACC against, you know, NC State and Duke, and then loses in the ACC championship and has to get an at-large bid. I mean, there's just some stuff like that where it sucks from Clemson's point of view because now your season ended because you lost 1 game, but that's just the way it is. I mean, they get to play Boston College, and, you know, Tennessee gets Georgia and Alabama. It's just the way college football works at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And that's fine if it works that way, but it's not fine if the College Football Playoff Committee is not taking that into account. And I think largely they are. And I think when people get, you know, Josh Pate says this all the time, and it's true. It's so annoying when people say you are what your record says. No, you're not in college football. This isn't the NFL. Okay. And I mean, we all know that Alabama would have done exactly to TCU what Georgia did to TCU last year, even though I don't think Alabama belonged in the playoff because the results do matter. To the message boards real quick. Rocky Top Tom talks about no way the ACC should get 2 teams in a 12-team format. I agree. He agrees with you. If Miami rebuilds astronomically quickly, maybe they could be the one to compete. And so Elias talks about it would have been – actually, this is a great point. Bill Snyder and Kansas State in the portal era would have been very intriguing. Jarreau, you may not know this, but funny story, Tennessee was expecting to play Kansas State in the national title in 1998, but Kansas State was upset by Texas A&M and the Big 12 title came. Texas A&M had Brandon Stewart at the time, who was Peyton Manning's backup at Tennessee and transferred because he lost the job to Peyton Manning. And I'm going to say something that Tennessee fans don't like to hear. Tennessee probably wouldn't have beaten Kansas State, not because they weren't better, but because John Chavis had no idea how to stop the triple option at that time. Chavis was not very good with, should we say, cutting-edge offenses or offenses that were different than what he regularly faced. Elias also says fans are going to get annoyed. Sorry?
I was going to say calling the triple option cutting edge is crazy.
Well, he wasn't used to facing it regularly. So,
yeah.
Because nobody in the SEC was running it.
Tennessee canceled the Army game this year because they didn't want to face the triple option.
Yeah.
Was it the Army game, right?
This past year they did. I don't blame them for that.
That was probably more so because the way, defensive linemen are going to tear their ACLs having to play the triple option. I mean, that's just the way it works.
Oh, yeah. 2006, Tennessee beat a top 10 Cal team, got to the top 10. The next week they play Air Force and beat them 31-30, lose their best defensive lineman for the year and their best cornerback, Inky Johnson, for his career. And then they have to play Florida the next week. You don't want to play those triple option teams, you know.
Not fun.
So Elias has a good point, and I want to know if he says lots of fans are going to get really annoyed with being part of massive conferences when they're 20 years in without winning any titles. I talked about this with Dave recently. Maybe, but Jarreau, I don't think conference titles are going to carry that much weight in 20 years, honestly. I mean, I think in 5 years, conference titles are going to kind of be irrelevant at this point with the 12-team playoff.
Yeah, I think in football almost with these conferences, you almost want to add a regular season champion like you have in baseball and basketball. Because you talk about it, you hear a lot of people talk about it. Like, if you win the regular season SEC championship in basketball, instead of making a miraculous run in the tournament, it often holds more weight because that's 15, 16 games over instead of just 3 games of getting lucky in a tournament format. So I agree. I don't know how much they really weigh at this point. I mean, I guess for the 14 playoff, obviously it's pretty big. But, I mean, what's going to keep teams from, like I said, resting their starters in the conference championship? Like, if Georgia's undefeated in the SEC, plays in the SEC championship, why don't they just roll out their second strings?
Yeah, that is why I guess you would theoretically say the first round bye is a big thing because you don't have to play that 1 week, which has a role. But the big issue would be, would you rather finish third in the conference or second? Would you rather finish third in the conference or lose the conference title game? Because if you lose the conference title game, that's an extra week, and it's not like, and that's going to cost you a first round bye. Because D has a great point. Conference champions should be in the top 15 or forfeit its automatic bid. I would go even further and say they shouldn't even prioritize conference champions because, well, the College Football Playoff Committee, as you know, Jarreau, it's already in their formula to prioritize conference champions if it's close between 2 schools. They're supposed to prioritize conference champions. So if you can't make the case to be in the top 15, then it makes no sense for you to be one of the top 12 teams at that point because you're already getting a favorable push by being a conference champion in the college football playoff rankings. That is a tiebreaker for them. So I think this is so laughable how they're going about this, honestly.
Yeah, and I agree. I think for the SEC, I don't know if a conference championship makes sense, but like you said, for the Big Ten, I think they should probably keep a conference championship the way the format works right now. Because, I mean, I would be willing to bet in a couple years, there could be years where you can argue, like for Big 12 or Big 10 teams, that none of them deserve to be in the playoff. But since they won, or even like the Pac-12 after USC and UCLA leave, like if Oregon has a down year, but they still win the Pac-12 championship, you can make the argument that they shouldn't be in the playoff, but they won their conference championship, so they get to be in the playoff no matter what. So it's kind of like auto bids keep comparing to basketball, but like auto bids in basketball, like those schools probably shouldn't be in March Madness. And sometimes there's upsets that take away auto bids from or qualifiers from schools that deserve it. But that's just the way the format is. So I think eventually they won't carry much weight for conferences like the SEC, but I wouldn't doubt that the conference championship is still a big thing for like you've mentioned, the Big 12, Big 10 conferences like that.
Yeah. It's for the ones that won't put multiple. Probably not Big 10 because Big 10 is going to be right there with the SEC. But yeah.
Yeah, you're right eventually. But the Big 12 for sure, I could see Kansas State and somebody battling for their life in a conference championship to make it to the playoff.
Yep. Rocky Top Tom, I want to push back on you for a minute because you say this entire conversation is making old school true competitors roll in their graves. Can you imagine asking these questions to Bob Nealon? Okay, maybe if we're talking about transfer portal and NIL, but I got to be honest, realigning conferences and super conferences, Bob Nealon was part of that. Remember, the Southern Conference, when Bob Nealon took over at Tennessee, had 22 teams in it, and not every team played even the same number of games. Tennessee played 6 games. Other teams would play 8, and quite honestly, I don't think Bob Nealon was complaining when he won the 1927 Southern Conference title, playing 6 games, and he played one of the 6 best teams in the conference. So, I mean, look, Bob Nealon benefited a lot from this type of formula that we're complaining about right now. It actually helped propel his status. Before we move on, portions of the program brought to you by Zen Sports, peer-to-peer gambling. It's going across the state of Tennessee. It is excellent. It is so much fun. We're going to have some betting odds with you guys that you can bet against us for when the season starts. This is very cutting-edge gambling. Zen Sports. Go download the app. This is going to be one of the most exciting new phases of sports gambling going forward. Zen Sports. Go check out the app now. So speaking of changes in college football, and NIL was just mentioned, our boy Josh Pate, I'm not going to show the YouTube clip because it was too long, but he made a very good case yesterday, Jarreau, when I was listening to him about one of the biggest changes coming to college football. And one of the things he said was that we're about to enter a moneyball era of hiring coaches. So over the past 10 years, college football has the major programs, Texas A&M was the biggest one, but quite a few others. Alabama started, this was Nick Saban, have decided we need the best coach possible. Let's open up our checkbook for as much money as possible, to get whatever coach we can. And if he doesn't work out, we'll give him a huge buyout. That's fine. We'll pay the buyout. We'll corral money from the boosters, and then we'll go just find another great coach. It's not as much of a risk. But now that money is going to be a little bit tighter, and the buyout money is going to matter a little bit more because you need money now for NIL. Now, I know people like to pretend that it's not the same money. It's the same money because this is money coming from boosters. Okay, so you need that money for NIL. Josh Pate had a great argument that we might be entering a Moneyball era of coaches where people start meticulously, analytically trying to break down what makes a coach successful and how they can get the best value for a coach. Jarreau, here's one area where I disagree with him on that, and I want to know what you think. I think we overvalue the success of coaches and not the infrastructure of the program for why that coach was successful in the first place, if I'm being honest. And I want to know your thoughts on that.
I get what you're saying. But wouldn't the coach be the one building the program and the infrastructure at most places? I mean, I know y'all make the argument like LSU, Georgia, Ohio State, it doesn't matter, which is true. But other schools like the Texas A&M, don't you think Jimbo Fisher is partially responsible for building the infrastructure that would make Texas A&M successful?
I'd have said that 10 years ago. I wouldn't say it now. I'd say that, quite honestly, look, there's a baseline, and Jimbo Fisher, I think, is below that baseline. And the baseline is pretty high. It's a pretty high bar to meet. But I think that if you have a good coach there, not the best coach in the world, but a good coach, I think NIL and the infrastructure of Texas A&M would allow you to win championships there because they just open up the checkbook for any player they want to try to get. So I think the problem is Jimbo Fisher just had an offense.
I get what you're saying. The first thing that comes to my mind when you talk about the Moneyball approach is that, and LSU's coaching search is what came to my mind as well. You pay a lot of money and you get a big name coach like a Brian Kelly, and then your boosters donate more money because they're excited for the brand name coach. If you take the Moneyball approach and you hire, an offensive coordinator from somewhere, you don't really drum up that wow factor of hiring the guy. It sort of makes me think of like a Jeremy Pruitt. Tennessee hires Jeremy Pruitt. Nobody that I know was jumping out of their seat with joy to have Jeremy Pruitt as their coach. Now you take a Josh Heupel who had success at UCF, and a lot of people were excited for Josh Heupel to come to Tennessee. So I think whenever you take the Moneyball approach, you lose that wow factor, big name coach that can get fan bases excited.
Okay, but what if you're at a school like, say, Nebraska, where you just are going to have a hard time? Well, I guess that actually is the opposite. If you're Nebraska, you open up the checkbook to get whatever coach you can because you're not going to be able to lure a lot of players anyway, and you try to find some analytical advantage you can get. But
yeah, I really think a lot of times hiring coaches, if you get the big name, even if they just become like a CEO more so than an actual coach, the big name when your program's in the dumps and you need a new head coach, and Wisconsin brings in a Luke Fickell, that can energize a fan base, energize players to want to go there. Versus if you hire a coach who's an analytical mind, sure, but who's excited if you take a quarterback's coach or an offensive coordinator from XYZ school to come be your coach? It doesn't have the same factor that a big name does when you hire a new coach.
So I think more important than a big name, if you're at one of these other schools, is having a coach who has a system that hasn't been figured out. And that's where I think Josh Heupel, because I've always said Tennessee was a little bit limited on what it could do recruiting-wise, and they've always been. So I think the mistake Fulmer made hiring Jeremy Pruitt, Fulmer did that. He thought the principles from when he was head coach still applied. Okay, the reason Phil Fulmer was successful in the 90s was because Ray Goff was coaching at Georgia, and Alabama was on probation constantly, and Tennessee was able to go into those states and pluck out some talent. Okay, the minute Mark Richt got to Georgia and the minute Alabama stabilized, Tennessee fell apart because you can't just win at Tennessee out recruiting other schools because other schools have better recruiting bases. I would say Fulmer didn't understand that and hired Jeremy Pruitt thinking the same principles could work. So I would say if you have a cutting edge system as a coach, and I think the hard thing with this is where I think Moneyball or not, the hard thing with the athletic directors now, I think the most important thing is find the coach that has an offensive system that no one's figured out yet. And I mean, that's what Danny White found with Josh Heupel. He knew that no one has figured out this system, and the SEC would have a really hard time adjusting. the same way they did to Steve Spurrier with the fun and gun and the nice. And by the time someone does figure out Josh Heupel's system, he will have built up so much credibility as a head coach that he'll still be able to recruit at a high level.
I think even if you figure out Josh Heupel's system, he can still have success because there's so many ways Josh Heupel's offense can attack you. I mean, they can go over the top. Well, Clemson took that away. Well, Joe Milton nickel and dimed all the way down the field all night. You know, if they take away the middle, then you can still go back over. I mean, you still at some point you only have 11 guys on the field. So if you choose to take away the deep ball, Tennessee will eat you up in the run game, or they'll just throw it over the middle. So I agree with that to a standpoint, and I guess Josh Heupel would probably fall somewhere in between in the moneyball conversation because he still was not like a no-name guy, but he was more of an analytical coach with a good offensive system. So I guess he would be somewhere in the middle. And honestly, that's probably where a lot of these colleges want to lie, is somewhere in the middle, where you get a guy where, like, nobody was questioning Josh Heupel could win football games. It was just a question if he could do it in the SEC. Well, he brings his offensive scheme and his analytics and the Moneyball-esque part of himself and wins games in the SEC, and now he's a proven, credible head coach. So I guess now that I'm thinking about it, like, my best argument for this would be somewhere in the middle, where you get a guy who isn't a no-name, but isn't like a Nick Saban, but also brings in some of those analytical pieces like you were talking about, like maybe an offense that hasn't been figured out, or even if the offense has been figured out, an offense that can have success.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's what I think too. I think it's a lot of different factors that go into play, and this is where, and also they can get the type of personnel to run their offense at the school they're at. This is the flaw with Scott Frost. I don't think Scott Frost is a bad coach, but his system depends on speed, and Nebraska's not getting speed. It's funny. Elias just asked, could I see a program at this level doing analytics? Nebraska's going all in on analytics. They're fully embracing analytics with Matt Rule, and don't sleep on that. But to embrace it, you have to know what makes your program uniquely good. So if you're Nebraska, it's craft an offense that hasn't been figured out that is offensive line based. That's what you need to do if you're Nebraska. And
I was just about to say it has to be a culture fit too.
Yeah.
Because like Josh Heupel is still a Southern coach. Like he was at UCF. And you think of like a Luke Fickell going to Wisconsin. I feel like his personality fits Wisconsin football perfectly.
I agree.
And I think that'll be a good hire too. Wisconsin's another place like Nebraska where it's offensive line heavy, run the ball down your throat. And I feel like Luke Fickell's personality and the way he goes about himself fits that Wisconsin mold perfectly. So I feel like a lot more goes into it than analytics, especially when you're talking about college football more than, Moneyball works in the MLB because everybody has the same goals and there's really no play style differences or territorial differences. But I mean, if you're comparing like Nebraska football to Miami football, it is world different. And you have to have a coach that can fit that mold and continue with those, I guess you want to call them stereotypes, but that's how those schools are going to have to win football games.
Yep. And don't sleep on the Big Ten is making some moves right now, knowing that because they just signed that $7 billion deal across different TV networks. They're lapping the SEC in their money. That's why Wisconsin just fired its longtime loyal coach in Paul Chryst and brought in Luke Fickell. That's why Nebraska brought in Matt Rule. Kirk Ferentz isn't going to last at Iowa. These schools are going to be in really good shape going forward.
You think Iowa can't score 24, 26 points a game?
Was it that many? I thought that was the whole season they scored 24. I thought it was the whole season they scored 24, 26 points.
And I don't know. In his contract, he's got that clause. I really wish whatever channel Iowa plays on, there's a ticker in the top right-hand corner. And it starts at like 314 points or whatever his total has to be for the season and just ticks down every time they score. So, he's going to have to put up 50 on whatever cupcakes they play because they're in rough shape. That's going to be such a funny season.
Terrible shape. Portions of the program brought to you by Vassy Lawn and Garden. Whether you're coming in from Knoxville, Nashville, Chattanooga, doesn't matter. Vassy Lawn and Garden will save you a lot of money with their buying power. Man alive, it's worth the drive. Vassy Lawn and Garden. When we come back, we got one more segment to talk about. We're going to kind of look back on this Tennessee Vols athletic season now that it's over. One of the most successful in Tennessee history, but didn't walk away with any championships in any major sports. So is that a bit of a letdown? Find out when we return.
Sun, sand, and salt water, the beach is a very relaxing place. Unless you wear contacts. Ow! Open your eyes to the best the beach has to offer with LASIK vision correction from Campbell Cunningham Laser Center. Ah.
Hi, Mike Davis here with City Heating and Air, reminding you to always dare to compare. Our team provides quality local heating and air service, installation, and maintenance across East Tennessee. We use only the best equipment like American Standard heating and air conditioning for your residential, new construction, or commercial needs. Honesty, dependability, and customer satisfaction have been the cornerstones of our business since 1961. City Heat and Air.
Dare to compare.
Our family has been creating one-of-a-kind pieces of jewelry in West Knoxville since 1986. Each piece is a combination of unique processes that bring your idea to life. Every day in our shop, a truly special item with a story all its own is being manufactured in our facility, bringing the history and family sentiment into a whole new generation of life. We're grateful that you chose us to be Knoxville's best jeweler, a title that we value and respect. Because to me, being a jeweler and owning a jewelry store are not the same thing. I'm Rick Terry, I'm a jeweler, and we want to be your jeweler. Kingston Pike and Campbell Station Road in the heart of Farragut, and downtown on Gay Street right next to the Tennessee Theater.
When you want a hard cider that's easy to enjoy, one that's crafted to perfection, you need Tennessee Cider Company. Some say it's the signature cider of the South. Others say it's the cure to your craving. They all say you'll savor every sip. With a selection of ciders free to sample, all it takes is one taste. Visit tncidercompany.com for more information, as well as to shop our ciders and merchandise online. Thirsty yet? Doors open at 10 a.m.
Welcome back. We just pulled it up. It's actually his offensive coordinator, Brian Ferenc, but he must average 25 points a game for his contract terminates in 2024.
So great. And if he averages 25 points a game, his contract just adds another year.
Oh, wow. That's kind of intriguing. All right. So College World Series still going on. I believe the final game is tonight, right, Jarreau? And
yep, Game 3.
All right, so Tennessee's not in it, but they made the College World Series. They were the only program to make both College World Series, a New Year's Six Bowl, both Sweet 16s. By far, in terms of just raw numbers, the most successful athletic program in the nation, and arguably the most successful they've had, if you take it all analytically, ever. But no national championship in any sport. Now, a lot of people think this is going to be the norm for Tennessee athletics. Guys, I'm here to tell you that may be the case, but don't count on it. It's very rare to be this successful across all sports regularly, no matter how much stability you have. Given that fact, is it a bit of a letdown, Jarreau, that at least one of these schools didn't walk away with a national title this year?
I don't think so, just for the simple fact that you have to look at where the athletic department was, 2 years ago. I mean, football was burning. Men's basketball has always been consistent. Women's basketball was still rebuilding really after Holly Warlick. And baseball was really, before 2021, was not good at Tennessee, consistently good at Tennessee. So I think also we have to look at what sport were any of these teams favored to win a national championship in. Because I would argue that really baseball especially made a miracle run. I don't think many people had any of the teams favored to win the national championship. So I don't think it's as much of a letdown. Sure, it's disappointing that, they couldn't get farther in any of the sports. But with where the athletic department was 2-3 years ago, I think it's miraculous that you see this much stability and this much success under Danny White.
I think baseball they did start the year number 2, but I think everybody who actually was keyed into the program knew that they shouldn't have been number 2 to start the year. So it wasn't their fault that they were overhyped. I think the one letdown was the Lady Vols. If you remember, the Lady Vols were number 4 in the middle of the 2021-22 season before injury set in and just wrecked them down the stretch. They got everybody back. They loaded up in the transfer portal. They started this past year ranked number 4 and then just could never really get it going. So I think the women's basketball program was a bit of an underachieving team. I think Kelly Harper has done a better job this year, maybe retooling the roster, having better fits in how she's going to run it. And Tamara Key coming back is a big deal. But I think that's the one team that you could say, you know, they probably were a bit of a letdown, the women's basketball team. They should have gone further than the Sweet 16 at the very least.
Yeah, I think they should have went farther than the Sweet 16, but I still don't think they were championship favorites necessarily. Which, I mean, you can argue they had a lot of transfer portal additions. It took a long time to gel. I mean, the loss of Tamara Key was massive because that's what, and for anybody who's watched the Lady Vols recently, their defense runs around Tamara Key. She's the anchor in the defense. And then all of a sudden, you know, I think it was 3 weeks into the season, you take out your best defensive player that you base most of your schemes around and are forced to learn how to play basketball again. So I agree with you. I think she's retooled the roster. I think they'll be very successful this next season because they do have fits, and more specifically, they'll be able to stretch the floor this season with the shooters they picked up. But I would say they should have went farther than the Sweet 16, yes. Championship, I don't really think so, I guess. But I get the mantra, and I've seen it on Twitter too, that people are kind of making fun of Tennessee fans, like, oh, Tennessee should hang a banner about making the Sweet 16 in both basketballs and winning in the Orange Bowl, but you didn't get any championships. I don't think it's a letdown necessarily, though. I still do think taking like the culture of Tennessee recently into consideration, then really what happened this year with athletics finally having stability is very good for the future, I would say.
So the first program to win the national title among these sports will be
men's basketball. I'll go.
You're going men's.
I think Rick Barnes can get it this season because he's also retooled his roster and they can also stretch the floor this season. And you bring back veteran leadership. So I feel like for next season, I would say men's basketball probably has the best shot.
It's funny.
Honestly, either basketball really. Because both teams are going to have a lot better roster. I think both coaches are capable. It's just a matter of making the jump and getting it done.
It's funny you say that. I think I've noticed that Rick Barnes seems to be – this is the first time in his career. It looks like with what he's gone after in the transfer portal and recruiting, looks like he's changing his philosophy for the first time in his career. I mean, he's not going for those big defensive wing guys anymore. He's got one, but he's really, you're right, trying to stretch the floor with shooters. And
And if they can stretch the floor, that can be a very dangerous team. And as long as Zakai Ziegler gets healthy, I don't think many people expect him to be 100% at the beginning of the year. But if you can see him kind of get back into his form and start passing the ball to some of those shooters in SEC play and using some of his playmaking skills and actually hitting guys who will knock down threes, that team will be pretty successful.
Right. And it's interesting on the women's side. This is no knock against Jordan Horson, but I just never thought she was a fit for what Kelly Harper was trying to do. You know, Kelly Harper likes to play inside out and stretch the floor. Those slashing guards that drive to the basket, that's not really what Kelly Harper wants in her system at all. But, you know, she tried to tool it around Horson. I think she had a hard time over 4 years doing that.
I think there were games where Jordan Horson played how Horson should play, and Tennessee had success. But then there were games where Jordan tried to be a guard a little too much. I think my thinking, and she's had success in the WNBA now, and like she's going to have a good career, obviously, with her numbers she's putting up with the Seattle Storm right now. But my thinking was always Horson couldn't find that line of when to pass and when to go up for the layup. So, because, I mean, they were obviously like, you could watch the games and be like, wow, if she would have kicked it out right there, that would have been a good play. Or, wow, she should have went up with that. So I think in the WNBA now, she doesn't have to worry about her playmaking as much, and she can be more of that wing-type slasher guard. And she can really kind of let herself play a little more. They had Jordan Walker was a good point guard last season, but they never really had that true Zakai Ziegler-esque guard. that was a threat to shoot, play make, or drive to the basket, which is really what I think they needed.
Yep. And so you're not confident baseball can get back to the CWS next year? We talk about, so you were talking about earlier, Chase Burns in the transfer portal, right? And we got some news on that.
Yeah, he hasn't gone. There's been some people who say he's gone officially, but he's not in it officially yet. But I would say that's a high possibility right now. From everything I've heard, he was very upset with the move to the bullpen halfway through the season. So he'll probably end up in the transfer portal. Where he'll end up, I have no idea. But
I don't know why he was
it seems
upset.
like a
He
move
was
to the
so much
portal
better.
for him is-
He was so much better in the bullpen than he was starting.
Yeah, his ERA was like 11 when he was starting. So I'm not really sure what the – and I'm sure – I mean, Tony Vitello would be dumb not to try to start him again next season. So it's not that he's – I highly doubt Tony Vitello told Burns that he's forever a bullpen pitcher at Tennessee. That just doesn't make sense with Burns' skill set because nobody's coming out of the bullpen with 4 pitches.
Yeah.
You know, you usually have you have a fastball slider guy, not a Burns guy where he can throw 4 pitches basically for strikes. So
yeah,
another thing, baseball is a lot of luck based.
Oh yeah, baseball's totally luck based, but that also could increase their chances of winning it because just get in and anything happens. It's the biggest reason baseball is the one sport where, the expanded postseason in Major League Baseball is stupid. It's so dumb because baseball's so luck based that I think you need to limit who can get into the postseason and put more value on the regular season in baseball than any other sport, honestly.
Well, and the MLB is a little different because it's 7 and 5 game series. The worst for college baseball luck base is think about Clemson. So Clemson goes 13, 14 innings with Tennessee, loses by 1. Well, now they're 1 game away from their season ending. They have to wake up the next morning and play Charlotte. Their pitcher has a bad game against Charlotte, their season's over. There's no, game 3, let's go back. That's just it. So that's what makes college baseball such a unique sport is because there's really no room for error. And there's if a couple balls fall Tennessee's way, I mean, they could still be playing right now. Yep. Or if Auburn learned how to play baseball and didn't lose their super regional, Tennessee could have went home 2 weeks ago. I mean, it's just, there's so much stuff with baseball. It really takes a lot of things to go your way. And I think Tennessee baseball will be good next season. They bring in a lot of good freshmen, and they're in with a lot of transfer portal guys right now competing to land them. It's just I would not bet on baseball to be their first championship.
So the first national champion is going to be on the hardwood, according to Jarreau, not on any field, as far as we're aware.
I would think so. If you're just looking at now, if you want to talk 24, 25, 26, and obviously you have Nico, but I would say in this next season, your best bet is probably on the hardwood.
Yep. I think I'm probably with you on that. Portions of the program brought to you by Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Kahn. No contacts, no glasses. You can have LASIK surgery. They have great local vision care in East Tennessee. Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Kahn. For Caleb Jarreau, this has been Caleb Calhoun. Again, Dave's on vacation this week. I will not engage any of your conspiracy theories on the message boards unless they're really, really funny. So you have to have a good one. But yes, Campbell, Cunningham, Taylor, and Kahn. Jarreau, thanks so much for doing this. And you guys have a great rest of your Monday. Enjoy the last week in June. Enjoy the summer. Have a good one, everybody.